Hey, welcome back, everyone. Some concerning news today, but also some good news. Well, we're going to start off today with the more concerning stuff, which is nuclear exercises against Russia seem to be like they're starting. There's also a lot of big political shakeups happening right now, and frankly, it looks like these conflicts are frankly not looking good for the people, not looking good for the powers that be, let's call them. Especially right ahead of the midterm elections. The timing couldn't be worse, frankly. And also, folks, it's going to be an interesting week. There's a lot I want to talk about this week. A lot I can't get into in just one episode, but it's going to be an interesting week. Let's put it that way. Also, I don't know if you all saw, but Kanye is buying Parler. That's going to be very interesting to watch. Maybe I'll try to do something on that too. But for today, let's get into these nuclear exercises, what they mean, what Russia is saying with these, the talk about nuclear war, Elon Musk warning about this. Elon Musk coming out and saying, actually nuclear war is a really bad thing. Why don't we have peace talks? Elon Musk gets canceled because of it. And now you have a Ukrainian group who put him on a kill list to assassinate him. Really wild stuff. I'll be talking about this today, folks. That said, thank you all for being here. Those of you on YouTube or Rumble, we will jump over exclusively to Epic TV after about 25-ish minutes. It's our uncensored platform. Come support us there. It's only because we have that we keep the show going. And, big thanks out to everyone who's helping us keep it going. So thank you so much. Don't worry, we're not going anywhere. That said, folks, let's jump into the first story. I want to talk first about these nuclear exercises against Russia very openly, what they mean, why they're significant. Let's talk about this. Now, Euronews has this story. They're saying NATO nuclear exercises to go ahead despite tensions with Russia. And it says NATO will go ahead with nuclear exercises next week despite escalating tensions between the West and Russia following Vladimir Putin's thinly veiled threats to use nuclear weapons. I would argue the nuclear threats actually came from both sides. Technically, Russia did it first. I'll get into that in a minute. But it says Secretary General to the Military Alliance, Jens Stoltenberg, said on Tuesday that the annual exercises are routine and were planned long before the Kremlin invaded Ukraine. The main part of them will be held more than 1,000 kilometers away from Russia and involve fighter jets with the capability to carry nuclear warheads, albeit with no live bombs to be used. Less than half of the NATO members' countries will take part in the exercises. When asked if they were a good idea given the delicate situation with Moscow, Stoltenberg said it would not be good to look to stop them now, and he said, it would send a very wrong signal if we suddenly now canceled a routine, a long-time planned exercise because of the war in Ukraine. That would be absolutely the wrong signal to send, the Secretary General told reporters in Brussels. Now, the reason why this is pretty controversial is because there's been actual talk of nuclear war. You might remember the Chechen leader came out and asked Putin publicly to use low-yield nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Of course, most countries, not the United States, but Russia, China, even like North Korea to some extent, they've been developing low-yield nuclear weapons. These are smaller nuclear weapons that are more portable, easier to move around. You can fit them in missile launchers disguised, for example, as shipping containers, or, for example, 18-wheelers on roads. The United States actually did have a program for that. They got scrapped. The program for that was called Midget Man. But, of course, the United States, as far as we know at least, never actually developed them. The idea is you can use a nuclear weapon in a localized area, which would constitute basically an extremely powerful missile, but not on the city or city-destroying scale that you would have, for example, with a Hiroshima or Nagasaki. That being said, after the Chechen leader called for that type of nuclear attack in Ukraine, Zelensky in Ukraine came out and actually called for NATO to launch preemptive attacks. And of course, the situation has become much more tense since then, to the extent that people warning about nuclear war and saying, hey, I don't want to have a nuclear war, are getting attacked and criticized and canceled, and it's very bizarre. This, though, is having a huge social impact. I'm going to get deeper into this on why this matters beyond the surface picture of, the possibility of nuclear war, which frankly I thought was over since the fall of the Berlin Wall when I was a kid. But here we are, right? Now, folks, before we go into this further, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by Secure. Over 155 million Americans are affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data and activity. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. That can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland, which is important because Switzerland has the strictest data privacy laws in the world. Secure does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, which also means it's not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act. It also does not, Secure does not ask for your phone number, it does not mine your data or upload your contacts. You can, doubts folks, if you're interested, it's $5 for the messenger, $7 for the email, or $10 for the email and messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, or you can use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring today's episode. And, secure communications are becoming, as we see, increasingly important, given the way that, frankly, the ridiculous level of Fourth Amendment violations has been going around. Violations of your, illegal searches and seizures, including of digital property belonging to you. It's becoming a real serious issue. Now, folks, deeper into this, let me revisit some history on this. I mentioned briefly that the Chechen leader actually called for attacks on Ukraine using low-yield nuclear weapons. Soon after that, that of course caused a big stir. But soon after, and keep in mind too, that was in context of even Putin himself repeatedly making nuclear threats. Then Zelensky comes out, head of Ukraine, and makes the situation significantly worse. And Zelensky responded by calling for preemptive strikes on Russia. Now, this is also in context of them somebody blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. The European nations have done an investigation on that, and they say the findings of the investigation are too sensitive to make public. I would assume that if Russia did it, it would not be deemed too sensitive to make public, but who knows? Also, Russia responded with basically declaring an all-out war. Things are reaching new heights. Then Zelensky comes out, and he calls for preemptive strikes on Russia. Fox News had this story. They said, Ukraine's Zelensky calls for NATO to launch preemptive strikes in Russia, spokesperson forced to clarify. Now, there were some debates over whether he was referring to nuclear weapons here. The context of it does suggest he was calling for nuclear strikes on Russia. But given that context, of course, you can oftentimes manipulate it. And so basically it caused a lot of controversy. After it caused controversy, spokespersons and the whole, establishment media came out and tried covering it and saying, oh, that's not what he really meant. But let me show you what he said. It says Ukrainian officials have seemingly walked back on comments from President Volodymyr Zelensky, who appeared to call upon NATO to launch preemptive strikes into Russia to stop Russian President Vladimir Putin's nuclear threats. During a virtual address to the Lowyield Institute on October 6, Zelensky was asked how the international community could help prevent a nuclear war between Russia and Ukraine. In his answer, the Ukrainian president mentioned launching preemptive strikes, and he said, quote, "We can already see that these people, being Russian officials, are capable of such atrocities. What must NATO do? Make it impossible for Russia to use nuclear weapons." Now, that's according to Yahoo News, and Zelensky added, "But what is more important, I'm once again turning to the international community, as I did before February 24th, to do preemptive strikes so that they know what will await them if they use it. And the context of that is nuclear weapons." Now, how do you do, in response to nuclear weapons, preemptive strikes? The automatic connotation of that would mean preemptive nuclear strikes, first use policy. He's saying preventative, right? Now, the strike, he says, right, could not happen the other way around, suggesting if Russia were to attack them first, could not happen the other way around. And of course, he's saying that that they need to, quote, they cannot, quote, wait for Russia nuclear strikes, which would only make the conflict worse. He said, reconsider applying pressure. That's what NATO should do, and consider the order in which it is applied. Now, if you consider the order in which it is applied, what he means is that Russia is going to apply the use of a nuclear weapon, and you need to change the order in which it applies, thereby meaning or suggesting that changing the order that the NATO countries should do it first. Now, that being said, of course, one of the big arguments of nuclear weapons is first use policy. Who would do it first? And if someone did do it first, what would the reaction be? Now, that being said, you can interpret this in multiple ways. And I know that there's a big campaign to try to roll back Zelensky's comments, saying this kind of preventative strike, which does encompass the idea of preemptive strike. He's saying preventative, but if you want to do it first, that is a preemptive strike. The context of that would be, of course, he's stating it in context of nuclear weapons. You can interpret that as being preemptive strikes using nuclear weapons in order to prevent Russia from having the capability to launch attacks in the first place. He's asking for basically Russia's nuclear capabilities to be wiped out. That's what he's asking for. That being said, if you were to wipe out a country's nuclear capabilities, that could very easily trigger a nuclear war, as has been discussed since the Cold War. And Russia also has allies that are nuclear-armed countries, including, for example, the Chinese Communist Party, which has signed a no-limits agreement with Russia in terms of their cooperation with each other. No limits which would encompass the use of nuclear weapons because there are no limits to it. Now, given this situation where, frankly, we've been closer to a nuclear war than we've been since the Cold War, and I remember, I was a kid at the time. I remember when the Berlin Wall fell. I was only a few years old, of course, but I remember adults talking about it. This idea that the fear that really did exist during that time of nuclear war. I remember as a child being legitimately afraid of nuclear war. That fear suddenly went away, and it was a big relief to everybody. The reality now is that we're probably closer to nuclear war than even at that time. Given that situation, Elon Musk was one of the main individuals that came out and voiced his concerns about this. Elon Musk called for peace. And what happens? Elon Musk was attacked for it, very aggressively attacked for it. And let me show you this. Daily Star UK has a story. They said, Elon Musk warns nuclear war probability rising rapidly as he responds to a theory from an individual named Mad Max, suggesting that actually it looks like we're heading towards nuclear war. It says Elon Musk has claimed that the probability of nuclear war is rising as tensions escalate in Ukraine. The world's richest man was responding to a post on Twitter that included a flowchart suggesting the probabilities of various outcomes in the war. The diagram was put up by Max Tegmark, a Swedish-American physicist, a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now, further in it states that he said above his diagram, here's why I think there's now a 1 in 6 chance of an imminent global nuclear war, and why I appreciate Elon Musk and others urging de-escalation, which is, in my humble opinion, in the national security interest of all nations. The chart showed a theory about how various scenarios in the war could lead to similar situations to other wars in the past. In other words, if you look at historical patterns of what led to wars, we're following the exact patterns. And the method of this war that they're considering is one around nuclear weapons. And Elon Musk, who was tagged in the post, responded, quote, nuclear war probability is rising rapidly. And his claim comes after Musk drew criticism when he posted a poll on the same platform where he suggested a Ukraine-Russia peace, a road to peace for Ukraine and Russia, that listed a number of criteria he felt likely and possible in a bid to stop nuclear war. So Elon Musk is calling for peace. He's getting behind, ironically, kind of an anti-war movement. He's urging Ukraine and Russia to make a peace treaty, resolve things. Remember that actually in the beginning of the war, Ukraine was going to make a peace treaty with Russia and negotiate with them. It was actually the United States and the West that stopped Zelensky from negotiating with Russia on peace. And as we ride very strongly towards the real scenario of possible nuclear war, Musk was warning about that and what happens. Musk got significantly attacked to the point where he was put on a kill list. A list to assassinate people. And this sounds far out, but it's true. And the list also appears to have some ties to the Ukrainian government. Now, this list that they put out, allegedly it's run by some, non-government group, just some random one. It is being allowed to exist on the Ukrainian internet. And also, if you look at the structure of it, there are some weird government ties. People are taking this to suggest that Zelensky or maybe the Ukrainian government has put Elon Musk on a hit list for even talking about peace and expressing concerns that the world may be heading towards nuclear war. Zero Hedge said this. It says, Elon Musk alarmed after apparent inclusion on well-known Ukrainian kill list. It says Elon Musk has publicly expressed alarm over his name and profile appearing to have been added to a well-known Ukrainian kill list following controversy and outrage from Kiev over his prior Russia-Ukraine peace poll. How dare he make a poll over calling for peace? And subsequent threats to cut funding for Starlink satellite internet services deployed in the country. Remember, Elon Musk is providing free of charge his Starlink internet to Ukraine. He briefly was going to remove that. Ukraine, of course, uses that for targeting and other things, so they technically need it to be able to run the war. Musk noted that Starlink is not making a profit because people expect it for free. And given that they expect it for free, of course, is not getting money. And also, other countries are not giving money to finance it. So he's giving them essentially one of the core technologies they need to keep the war going. He was going to pull that out. He got put on this kill list as he's calling for, an end to the possibility of having a nuclear war. He ended up actually restoring the Starlink system to Ukraine, but since then, since restoring it, he has put up a donation page. So if people can donate to Starlink in order to support its use in Ukraine. Now, on Friday, the billionaire SpaceX founder responded directly to a viral tweet by independent journalist Eva Bartlett, which claimed, quote, Musk added to Ukraine's kill list, which includes 327 children, in which he asked her, is this list real? Musk later appeared to answer his own question in the affirmative, tweeting out a link to the kill list website's Wikipedia page. The website within recent weeks fell into the spotlight after Pink Floyd's Roger Waters highlighted his own inclusion on the list. Now, Newsweek, meanwhile, in attempting to identify and verify the Ukrainian website, suggested that it is independently run, but at the same time opened the question of whether it has direct links to the Ukrainian government, because there are ties with that kill list to the Ukrainian government. I won't go over all of that. Now, I'm going to get into the significance of this because actually this is interestingly probably, in my opinion, the core of a war. I will explain what that means. There are two wars in every battlefield. There's the war of ideology, and there's the war of swords and bullets. And Ukraine is very quickly losing the war of ideology. As the United States witnessed in the Vietnam War, you can win the shooting war, you can win the killing war, but you can lose the entire war if you lose the war of ideology. That's what happened in Afghanistan. That's kind of what happened in Iraq. It's absolutely what happened in Vietnam. You cannot measure a war just by the results on a battlefield, at least not a normal war, not a modern war. All modern wars, the fundamental battlefield is ideology. It is the war of words, not the war of bullets. Ukraine, by making actions like this, is very rapidly losing the war of ideology and losing the war of bullets and giving Russia frankly, a lot more ammunition on that front. It's significant. And even more so than this, the groups and politicians that are siding with the idea that nuclear war is somehow a desirable thing, and I'm not even joking at this point, are facing massive criticism. This is going to be something that's going to affect the midterm elections. This is going to be something that affects the voting base of the Democrats, a voting base which is typically very anti-war. A lot of really old school Democrats, they were the party of anti-war. They were the party that opposed George Bush. They were the party that were against these types of things. The party itself has moved away from that, but the voting base has not. And a lot of even the far left socialists seem to be kind of weighing their, kind of looking at their cards and deciding which ones to pull off the table, to the point where they're even going after AOC. And I'm going to show you where this is heading, because this is a really significant phenomena we're watching that's going to really change the voting trajectory, I think. Let me start off with Representative Paul Gosar. He's saying this on Twitter. He's saying NATO leadership refuses to offer any sort of off-ramp. They're not even attempting to de-escalate the situation between Russia and Ukraine. And the left slanders anyone who does, like Elon Musk. We must reject nuclear war. We must reject more unnecessary death and destruction. Now, do you see what's happening here? Elon Musk, even though he's not, of course, killed on this, his being canceled, he's become a sort of martyr for the idea of peace. He's become a sort of martyr for standing up against the idea of, nuclear holocaust. Elon Musk is really becoming the face, in an interesting way, of an anti-war movement that ironically is being supported by people who traditionally would have been seen as the pro-war party. The Republicans, under Bush especially, were viewed as the pro-war party. That identity is changing. And as this moves now towards more of a populist political shift, one that Trump's going to use and so on, Trump actually, in terms of war and stuff, was really the president of peace in the truest sense of the word, at least was moving very strongly in that direction, is going to represent an anti-war movement. And understand why this matters as well as we go into the midterms. Now, further in, it says this, that Russia, interestingly, is upping the ante. Thank you for telling me to say that right. Russia is upping the ante. And they're saying now there's a declaration of war without rules. Now, when they made this statement, this was in response to the bombing of the Crimean Bridge, which, of course, followed very closely the bombing or the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines. I'm not going to say who done it when it comes to the Nord Stream pipelines. I did show you all significant evidence, looking at just plainly the facts, that do suggest that the United States was very likely the one that did it. There's no evidence other than suggesting that Russia might have the capability for it, which is even debatable. No evidence outside of just who has the capability that Russia had any part in it. That being said, there is significant evidence the United States did have a part in the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. After that, not too long after, a bridge was bombed. That was the Crimean Bridge, which actually damages Russia's supply lines, which is going to be pretty significant as we go into winter. And keep in mind, folks, winter in Ukraine is not like winter in New York. Winter in Ukraine is a cold, cold winter. Winter in Russia and Ukraine is what kills armies. That's the fall of Napoleon. That's the fall of the Nazis fighting in Stalingrad. Winter in these countries is serious. If Russia cannot have supply lines, that is a dangerous situation. And the question is whether they would surrender because they cannot properly supply and support their troops, or would they escalate it? Well, they're now saying that they will escalate it. And they're saying there's now a declaration. They're saying that the bombing of that bridge was a declaration of war without rules. Which, understand the deeper context of that. The Chinese Communist Party has what they call unrestricted warfare. It's not adopted into official military code. It was a book written by two Chinese colonels in the late 90s. But it lays out also the idea of war without rules. When you get into the concept of war without rules, that is the system where you do total war. Understand that Russia and Ukraine, was not even a full-out, all-out war. Russia is not deploying the full force of its military powers, even though they are doing quite a bit. Nuclear war and low-yield nuclear weapons have not been done. And also they were not targeting major cities, at least not on a large scale. After they made this declaration, they then began targeting all the major cities. They began launching large-scale attacks. When you move from a localized or even proxy war, and you're trying to do like smaller operations, that's one thing. When you go into total war, that means the mobilization of an entire society in the battlefield. That means that everything, including foreign investment, economy, energy, land, resources, everything becomes a tool of war. Once you get to that stage, that is where Russia, might just cancel gas to all of Europe throughout all of winter. That is where Russia might actually use a low-yield nuclear weapon. That is when you get to the stage where nothing, absolutely nothing is off the table. And that's the situation things are heading into now. Let me show you a video, folks, of what happened soon after this. Right after Russia made that declaration of war without rules. Right? No rules warfare. There were explosions all throughout Ukraine. This is Kiev, Lviv, Ternopil, Zimortir region, all kinds of areas, all throughout the country. Cities bombed, attacks all over the place. Areas that would not have very likely been included on the target list have now been included on the target list. Cities and so on. It is entering the state of more full warfare. This is very quickly escalating. Now, that being said, I mentioned, folks, that with any war, you have two different battlefronts. If you were to talk to, for example, the Vietnamese, I mentioned this briefly, but a bit more on this. If you were to talk to a Vietnamese, general or commander about the Vietnam War, they would tell you that they fought two wars. There were two wars in Vietnam when America was there. There was the war of bullets, and there was the war of words. They lost the war of bullets, they won the war of words, and we saw which one of those two matters the most. By winning the war of words, they won the war. America did not lose the shooting war in Vietnam, but we lost the ideological war. And when you're dealing again with situations like this, the justification, the will to fight, all of these things are significant. All of these things tie into the idea of whether the country has the support of the people fighting the war, of whether other nations support that country in fighting that war, and whether international pressure will try to divert them from that path. It ties into whether, especially in countries that have election systems, whether the people who, vote and go to the polls choose, and this is the big part, choose to continue voting for the people who allow for the war to take place, or whether they vote in new people who will oppose it and try to end it. The Vietnam War, of course, ended up with, the voting base of the United States voting in politicians who significantly disarmed the American troops, made it so American troops could not even shoot at the enemy unless they were shot at first. Where if they were getting shelled by mortars, they had to call in permission to fire back. And by the time they got permission to fire back, the Viet Cong would have already moved the mortars and they would hit nothing. In other words, the American public voted in people who sabotaged the troops on the ground. And you're going to see now something very similar to that. Maybe I don't think Republicans would sabotage American troops by any means. But you are going to watch people vote out the people who support these policies. And interestingly, this is one of the biggest possible blows I think the Democrats could face. Maybe second only to the economy and the gas and so on. Even though that is also affecting Russia and so on, is in fact affecting the gas prices and so on. The phenomena of the Russia-Ukraine war is affecting people's basic livelihoods. At the very least, Biden is pointing to Russia as being responsible for high gas prices, even though he could point to a lot of his domestic policies. That factor and their interest in basically drawing this whole thing out is going to make them lose elections. And let me show you some proof of that. Folks, this is on Twitter, and this is Ocasio-Cortez, and she's giving a speech, and protesters are calling her out. Her own voting base is calling her out and expressing their discontent over her supporting what's happening in Ukraine. And let me play this for you so you can hear.
Okay? So, I'm looking out for you all. So there's two things. First, federally, when the president's marijuana-related...
Congresswoman, none of this matters unless there's a nuclear war, which you voted to send arms and weapons to Ukraine. Tulsi Gabbard, she's left the Democratic Party because they're a bunch of war hawks. Okay? You originally voted, you ran as an outsider, yet you've been voting to start this war in Ukraine. You're voting to start a thermonuclear war with Russia and China. Why are you playing with the lives of American citizens? You're playing with our lives.
There will be no neighbors if there's a nuclear bomb. You voted to mobilize and send money to Ukrainian Nazis. You're a coward. You're a progressive socialist. Where are you against the war mobilization? He's telling the right truth. You have done nothing. Tulsi Gabbard has shown guts where you've shown cowardice. I believed in you, and you became the very thing you sought to fight against. That's what you've become. You are the establishment, and you are the reason why everybody will end up in a nuclear war unless you choose to stand up right now and denounce the Democratic Party. Will you do that?
Now, folks, again, I think I've made my stance clear on Russia and Duginism and National Bolshevism, and frankly, I don't necessarily see a good guy or a bad guy with this. Frankly, I think we have kind of two bad guys fighting each other. Also, I'm very much aware of the significant corruption in Ukraine, the fact that it was brought to power through a color revolution, which had Soros involvement and involvement of, pretty dirty politics. I'm very much aware of these things. That being said, what I'm talking about is the phenomenon right now. This factor and the fact that, frankly, the Democrats are becoming the party of war and the party of nuclear war is going to do them a lot of harm for the midterm elections. They are going to lose a lot of their voting base. We see this happening. Now, folks, I want to go into some other stuff that I can't talk about on YouTube, in particular what's happening with Alex Jones. So let's jump over exclusively to Epic TV. I want to detail what's happening with Alex Jones and how he has to pay $1 billion with a B, or almost $1 billion with a B, to the parents of the Sandy Hook victims. Folks, this is significant. $1 billion, or almost that, is unheard of. But let me explain to you what's happening with this. Before we jump over, though, folks, a lot of you are asking about climate change and, basically how do you prove can we prove that it's fake? I'm going to get on some folks for y'all to give you some of the answers to that question. I recently interviewed Gregory Wrightstone, and we had a very interesting interview about how the climate agenda, what it is, and how the data for it that's being used is fake. Let me show you a trailer for that. It's on Epic TV. Then we'll jump over to Epic TV exclusively. We'll talk about Alex Jones and a few other things.
What they would love to have you do is stay in your home and not drive your car, unless it's electric. They want you to not heat your home with natural gas. They're pushing all these ideas that will economically cripple the United States, and we're seeing the effects of this with runaway inflation. They're intentionally inflating energy costs, increasing energy costs.
They seem to have taken a lesson from how far they can push things with COVID, the idea they can declare like a national emergency.
Zero fossil fuels, that's their end game. They want to go to net zero, and we just can't do it. The truth is, CO2 is a hugely beneficial molecule. We're seeing the earth greening and thriving. We're breaking crop growth records year after year. So we're huge proponents of more CO2. By almost every metric we look at, the Earth's ecosystems are thriving and prospering, and humanity's benefiting from it. And instead, they're trying to kill crop production. They want to tell you how to heat your home, how to drive your car, what car you'll drive.
Again, folks, that's Gregory Wrightstone. That's exclusively on Epic TV. And that says jump over to Epic TV, where we don't have to worry about YouTube canceling us and deleting our video. So come join me as I get into the part where YouTube will probably ban us and delete our video if I talk about it. I'll see you on Epic TV. Come join us now. Again, I do an hour-and-a-half show. I'll see you there. All right, folks, take a moment with me to breathe the fresh air of freedom.